Hello and welcome to ED 534 Multicultural Perspectives. My name is Curtis Garcia. I'm an assistant professor with the department as well as the department chair, and I will be serving as the instructor for this course. This course is offered as part of Adams State University's graduate programs in education, and it provides you with an in-depth look at some of the topics concerning multicultural education in the United States. Each week, I will provide a slide deck like this one that briefly reviews the readings and assignments for the modules, and also just kind of gives you some insights into the kinds of things that you should be focusing on and paying attention to as you engage with those readings and assignments. Here's a brief overview of Module 1. We'll be spending some time over the next couple of weeks with some brief introductions, just getting to know one another, and starting to familiarize ourselves with the content of the course and each of the personal goals that you all will establish as you engage with the course materials. As I mentioned before, this week is also just about providing an overview of the course as a whole and talking about some of the expectations, as well as providing just a broad overview of multicultural teaching and learning, what it is, what it is not, and starting to become comfortable with some key definitions that you'll be working with around multicultural education in this course. One of those definitions is culturally responsive pedagogy, so we'll spend some time in this module learning about what that is and what kinds of strategies and practices play into culturally responsive teaching and learning. We're also going to use this module to start framing our minds around this idea of critical multicultural education and developing a critical mindset towards teaching and learning. As you will find with many of the course readings and materials, they have been purposely selected and designed to push on your comfort levels a little bit and start to encourage you to think critically about many of the pieces of teaching and learning that we may take for granted and that we may not realize are loaded with cultural values, norms, and even biases. And so we'll start to create a frame for unpacking some of those deeper concepts as we get further into the semester. Finally, in this module, we'll have some time to reflect on practice and start to think about our own lives and how those play into who we are as cultural beings. It's important that as culturally responsive teachers, we engage in reflective practices continuously, and a big step in that is becoming comfortable with thinking about our own experiences and how our own values have been shaped by those experiences since we ourselves were students in the school systems, and how those values in turn translate to our practices as teachers. So as we get the course started, one of the things that I will be asking you to do is reviewing the course syllabus. This was emailed out to you all in the introductory email. It is also available in the Blackboard shell. In the course syllabus, we have our course objectives and outcomes. You can see here that this course is designed to provide teachers with an overview of the role of cultural diversity in the classroom and its effect on teaching and learning. While exploring issues of race, class, culture, and power, our hope is that you will develop a deeper understanding of school demographics, perspectives on teaching and learning, and the interaction between pedagogy and culture. You will gain an understanding about the effects of different social, cultural, linguistic, and cognitive experiences on learner development and the impact this can have on your choices as teachers and leaders. So as a general frame for this course, I like to say, and just give students this little heads up, that again, it is designed to push on your comfort levels somewhat and get you to think more deeply around some difficult topics that we may not always feel very comfortable discussing in professional settings. But here, we're about creating a safe space where we can engage with some of these issues and start to express our own thinking and reflections around what they mean in our work as teachers. So in addition to this overview, inside the course syllabus, you will also find a content outline. Here you will see a description of each of the modules that we will engage in, as well as the specific learning objectives that have been identified for those modules. And you will also see a listing of the assessment measures and artifacts that are linked to each module. There are due dates which are posted inside the Blackboard shell. If you click on the calendar tab, you will be able to see reminders there of when specific assignments and discussions are due. Also in the course syllabus, you will see some important language around some of the course policies, including participation and engagement and discussion board posts. I will say right now that discussions are critical in this course, and it is expected that you are engaging regularly with class discussions. So each of these modules are designed to last either 2 or more weeks. During that time frame, you are expected to be continuously engaging in discussion forums with your peers. This means that if you wait to post all of your discussions on the last day of the module, you will get docked some points for not demonstrating that continuous engagement. It's very essential that each week of the module you're contributing something to those discussions, because those discussions represent some of the more continuous engaging pieces of this course. There's also some guidelines in the syllabus for submissions of class assignments and papers. It is expected that all assignments and papers are uploaded to Blackboard. You're not allowed to send those through email, and we are not allowed to accept those through email as instructors. So please do use Blackboard for submitting all class papers and assignments. Grading and feedback will be given as quickly as possible following the close of modules. So I do very much value giving each of you constructive feedback on your assignments. That takes time, so please allow up to 1 week for grading and feedback to come to you following the closing of every module. If for some reason I think it's going to take longer than that, I will send out a note letting you know that there's been a delay in grading your feedback, but you will each receive substantive feedback on every assignment that you submit for this course. You also will be given the opportunity to resubmit assignments if you're not satisfied with your initial grade. I'm very open to growth. That's one of the big pieces behind culturally responsive practice, is giving your students space and time to grow and demonstrate that growth. My only condition for accepting resubmissions is that you have to have met the original deadline for your first submission. So I will not accept late assignments beyond what's allowed in the syllabus. There is some language in there that talks about point deductions for late assignments, but you only have a limited time to submit anything late. After that, it automatically converts to a 0. However, if you are meeting those deadlines and you receive your feedback and decide you want to resubmit something, please take advantage of that opportunity, and I will review any resubmissions and give you some additional feedback as well as an updated grade. As we work through different assignments, please use the syllabus to go in and see the artifact descriptors that are listed for each assignment. There will also be rubrics available on Blackboard within each module and assignment that you can review so that you can see the specific criteria that are going to be used for grading on each assignment. A list of the readings is provided in the syllabus. There are only 3 books that you will need to purchase for this course. The rest of the readings are available as attachments in Blackboard. The books that you will need to either rent, purchase, or borrow from a library are Lisa Delpit's book, Other People's Children. It doesn't really matter which versions of these you're using. I'm not picky on that. The other book you'll need to purchase is Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Peter McLaren's Life in Schools, An Introduction to Critical Pedagogy and the Foundations of Education. These 3 books, as I mentioned, are really helpful in thinking about some of these major topics in multicultural education. And if you choose to buy them, I promise you, you will not be disappointed in that investment. These can serve as amazing resources to you as you continue down your career paths as educators working with diverse students. Finally, there is language in the syllabus pertaining to the student sexual misconduct policy, confidentiality, and statement regarding course adaptations and accommodations. Please review those at your own leisure and let me know if you have any questions specific to any of the course policies or expectations. At the very end of the syllabus, you will see a tentative course schedule in which I lay out the time frame for each module. So you'll notice, for example, that module 1 is a 2-week module, module 2 is a 3-week module, and so on. This is a really helpful resource for keeping track of the time frame for each module in the course. Also listed in this tentative course schedule are due dates for all of the module assignments and discussions. So please consult this course schedule regularly. Again, it is tentative, so it could change slightly depending on how the course actually goes. If there are any changes, they will be minor and they will be communicated out to you via Blackboard announcements. So as a general frame, everything has already been pre-planned and laid out for you here in this schedule. So our first discussion in the course module that you will find is just a brief introduction. One of the things I want you to think about as we enter into this course together is, why does this work even matter? So in addition to asking you to share just your name and a brief description about who you are and your experience thus far as a teacher, I want you to think about why exploring issues about race, culture, class, and gender matter to you as a person and as a professional. I think it's really important to kind of set the tone for our time together, that we're able to hear from everyone or read from everyone about why they're here to begin with and what they hope to take away from this course to ultimately help their students. So in the Blackboard shell, you will find a discussion board in which I've asked you to just post a brief introduction about yourself and respond to this question: why does this matter? The second piece that we're going to be working on during this first week is just taking a brief overview of the course topics. So on this slide are just some of the topics that we're going to be covering during our time together over these next few weeks. They include issues such as race, class, gender, culture, power, white privilege, cultural literacy, poverty, diversity, pedagogy, curriculum, and stereotype threat. Now, as you're reading through this list, some of you are probably thinking, okay, I'm somewhat familiar with that concept, or that's a concept I've never heard of before. And I kind of want to get a sense of where you're at with your understanding around these concepts. So the second piece of the module in Blackboard is really asking you to conduct a short pre-assessment of your knowledge around these course topics. In the Blackboard shell, you will find a template that has a grid that looks just like this. On the x-axis, we have your comfort level, and on the y-axis, we have your knowledge level. And I'm simply asking you to kind of plot the concepts that I just read on the previous slide on this coordinate grid based on your personal knowledge and comfort level with those concepts. This is a task that we'll revisit at the end of our time together so that we can actually see and visually kind of lay out where you grew in your knowledge and comfort level with these concepts. Now, there is a sample grid available on Blackboard for you to review so that you can kind of get a sense of what I'm looking for here. This is something that you'll conduct individually, and then you will upload a copy of your own grid to Blackboard for grading. So one of the big pieces that we're going to cover in this week's readings and assignments is this question around, what is multicultural education and what does it look like to be a multicultural educator? You will find that the readings were carefully selected to start to address this question and really start to lay a foundation for our work together over the next few weeks. So one thing I want to point out to help you in framing your thinking around the readings and assignments for this first module is that when we talk about multicultural education, we really want to aim for depth, particularly at the graduate level. So if you go out in the field and you just ask teachers, what does multicultural education mean to you? Many teachers will give you responses like, well, it's things like celebrating Black History Month in February, or celebrating Cinco de Mayo in May. These are common responses from teachers who kind of see multicultural education as these sporadic kind of celebrations of culture. But really, those kinds of things, while they are important, really only scratch at the surface of what we mean by multicultural education. In fact, as you will see in one of your readings for this week, we call that the Taco Tuesday approach because it essentially treats multicultural education as something that's only done once a month during the year or maybe one day out of the week, and not really anything that's embedded in our practice. Well, what I want to aim for in this course and what I really want to encourage you to think about as a practicing professional is how do you take this concept of multiculturalism and multicultural education and embed it in everything you do as a teacher, from lesson planning and curriculum design to assessment to how you build relationships with your students and interact with them, and also how you think about the kinds of activities that you do and learning experiences that you want to share with your students. So to that end, there are three essential traits to embedding multicultural education that I want to make you aware of to frame your thinking for this first week. The first one is multicultural education is about recognizing and valuing differences. And those differences can come in all shapes, forms, and sizes, whether it be race, ethnicity, social class, gender, sexuality. There's a complex myriad of our identities that comprise what we mean when we talk about diversity and valuing differences. And being aware of those differences and the complexities behind them is step number one in embracing multicultural education. The second piece is that not only are you aware of those differences, but as a teacher, as a multicultural educator, you use those differences as a teaching and learning tool to help students gain perspective around the world and to learn more about themselves and each other. Now, a critical step in this process is that as multicultural educators, we also have to be willing to critically reflect on our own experiences, our own facets of diversity, and our own identities in order to be able to share those and model for our students what it looks like to take those differences into account. And so our third point for thinking about multicultural education this week is that it really is about fostering personal relationships and organizational alliances that go beyond one's classroom. So you will find as we get deeper into the semester that we really go much deeper than just what kinds of strategies do we use for language learners or things like that. And we really start to look at the structures that underlie our education system and indeed our society as a whole. And it's important for us as critical multicultural educators to think about how we begin navigating those systems of power, privilege, and difference in ways that not only help us achieve what we want to as educators, but also help our students to live and work in a diverse society. So in a similar fashion to thinking about those facets of multicultural education, one of the goals of this course is to begin moving all of us beyond a colorblind approach to difference and towards a critical consciousness that underlies what it means to become a multicultural educator. So just like if you were to go out and ask teachers what multicultural education means, you'll often get responses around the Taco Tuesday approach. Sometimes when you go out into the field and ask teachers, what does difference mean to you? You'll get responses that kind of characterize this colorblind approach. So something to the tune of, well, I really don't see difference in my children. To me, they're all the same. Or I don't look at a child's race or ethnicity when they're in my classroom. To me, we're all human. While those are indeed carrying responses and probably really politically correct ones, they really don't get at the depth that we want to get at with thinking about multicultural education and the complexities behind it. The fact of the matter is that our history and our society is such that it does matter in terms of your historical narrative, what race, what gender, what ethnicity, what sexuality you are, and how those things have come to define who you are and shaped your experiences, not only as an individual, but as a group. And if we turn a blind eye to those things, we run the risk of downplaying things that are very important to our diverse students. So we want to be able to strike this balance between treating everyone the same, which is important, but also knowing when to acknowledge and recognize the critical differences that make our students who they are and that underlie their deep heritage and histories that they bring with them to the classroom. So our first reading for this week is really just a primer on multicultural education. It'll touch on many of the points that I just made briefly in some of the preceding slides, but it'll also raise some important questions for you to think about as we head deeper into this course together. My hope is that you can use this as a tool to kind of generate a common definition of what we mean when we talk about multicultural education and get a sense of what it is and what it isn't based on some of the things that I've just shared with you. So as you encounter the first reading and think about some of these concepts, what you'll start to discover is that multicultural education really runs along a spectrum. And at one end of that spectrum are practitioners who essentially ignore diversity and, for lack of a better word, take a colorblind approach to student diversity and difference in their classroom. This type of practice tends to focus more on assimilating diverse students into whatever the dominant culture is at the time. And it's common to see preferences for things like English only as the language in the classroom for practitioners or approaches like that. As we graduate and move right towards the spectrum on that, then we start to see teachers and practitioners who celebrate diversity, similar to the Taco Tuesday approach that I talked about before. So these are folks that don't necessarily ignore difference in the classroom, but if they do acknowledge it, it's probably on a superficial level, with either just celebrating heritage 1 month out of the year or 1 day out of the year, and not really getting to some of the depth that multicultural education brings to the table. So you might see some practices that fall into this heroes and holidays category. You might see practices that kind of mimic a culture day kind of approach, or other practices that may carry that day approach a little further into a week or a month, but are still along the same lines of just celebrating diversity as opposed to using it as an actual learning tool embedded in the classroom. Now, as we go one step further from that, that's where we start to get into the realm that I want you to start thinking about practicing as we enter into this course. And that's embedding teaching and learning about other cultures into the curriculum and the environment around you. So this can take many forms. Typically, it involves revamping entire curricula to ensure that we are including diverse perspectives into that curriculum. So a common example is, and this is for elementary, might be thinking about how we teach the quote-unquote discovery of America, and whether we focus on a figure like Christopher Columbus coming to America as the first discovery of this continent, or whether we're willing to open up other perspectives to what discovering America really entails and what the European conquest of America really entailed for the natives. So as we start to bring multiple perspectives into the curriculum, this starts to create that level of complexity that we want for our students. And it also starts to acknowledge some of those facets of diversity that are so important to doing multicultural education really well. Other types of practices that you might see in this approach involve things like providing multicultural course offerings across academic disciplines and content areas. So it may be developing a course that's specifically devoted to the contributions of women in science, for example, or math, or even the contributions of minorities to those content areas. These are the kinds of robust practices that step far beyond a Taco Tuesday approach and start to really deepen and embed multiculturalism within the curriculum. Finally, at the furthest end of the spectrum, we have what is called the critical approach to multicultural education, or for some people, this is the more extreme approach, which is actually changing systems and practices in response to growing diversity and reinventing those systems and practices in new and different ways. So this can involve teaching and learning about socio and political systems to students, having them get actively involved in politics and social movements to combat things like inequality, inequity, or injustice as they see it in their lives. This is really about empowering students to take how they experience and perceive the world and working as teachers to help supporting them in becoming agents of change within that process. Now, again, this lies at the farthest end of the spectrum because it does involve reinventing many of the traditional practices that we have come to see as normal within schools. but it does lie within the realm of multicultural education nonetheless, and it is a topic that we will be covering in more depth as part of this course. So just to give you a better sense of, or another view of what this spectrum of multicultural education looks like, this slide just kind of lays out um, those same approaches in a somewhat different manner and gives some additional description around what each approach looks like. I've provided this for you just as a tool to help you think about where you might fall in your thinking and practice along that spectrum and where you might want to land as a multicultural education teacher going through a graduate program and a course like this one. So the second reading for Module 1 is going to focus on this concept of culturally responsive education. We sometimes see this referred to in the literature as culturally responsive pedagogy. That's a term that emerged in the late 90s and through the 2000s. And we now see a new transition starting to form where literature is starting to look at this idea of culturally sustaining education. So the the whole overview of this week is really to start to get you to think, as I've mentioned before, about some of these deeper issues related to multicultural education. One of those issues that we'll be revisiting continuously throughout our time together is this concept of equality versus equity. The best multicultural educators know that there is a difference between these two concepts, and that one of the things we want to strive for to help our students is to guarantee them equity in their education. Once we can acknowledge that not every student comes to us with the same kinds of cultural capital or the same access to resources or opportunities, we can start to really critically think about what kinds of systems and supports we need to build for all of our students to help them achieve equity and all have the same access to those opportunities. This is very hard work, it's very complex work, and there are often no easy answers. So as we frame our first week together, I just want you to start thinking about this concept of equality versus equity and what it means for you and your students. And what things can you think about doing or changing in order to help enhance the equity that you provide for your students. Finally, our third reading for Module 1 is going to be the Condition of Education Report, which is issued by the Institute for Educational Sciences National Center for Education Statistics. This is a federal report that comes out each July, and so the version that we are going to have the most immediate access to is actually from year 2023. The updated report for 2024 will come out while we're actually later on in this course. But for Module 1, what I'm asking you to do is just read through some of the statistics in this report. The report is designed to capture different indicators for student outcomes and performance, and it finally, just want to remind you as you approach your discussions for this week, think about these concepts of equality and equity, what they mean in terms of the readings, what they mean in terms of your students, what they mean in terms of some of the data that you've read about in that report, and use this to help frame your discussion postings for our first week. So with that, as soon as you've read all of the readings that are posted on Blackboard, you will notice a discussion thread. Your job is to go in and reflect on the readings by posting a discussion thread that answers some of the questions that I've laid out there to help guide you. The other note for discussions is that you're expected to not only post your own discussion, but also read and respond to at least 2 other discussions of peers. This really serves as one of the most engaging pieces of our course and the time we have together. So I strongly encourage you to take these discussions seriously, really give us a sense of what you're struggling with or grappling with, but also be conscious of what your peers might be thinking or struggling with as well, and use this as an opportunity to interact with them and have some real kind of deep dialogue about the concepts that we will be exploring together. Your second assignment for this first week is to begin conducting your own individual reflection on your personal culture and begin documenting that in your personal culture rough draft, which serves as one of the main artifacts for this course. So there are some instructions for this in the Blackboard shell. There's also a copy of the rubric that I'll be using to evaluate this at the end of our time together. Really, your job is just to start thinking about your own values and beliefs and culture based on how you were raised and your own experiences, and begin that process of reflection. This is just going to be a rough draft that you submit for this week where you get some of your thoughts and ideas down on paper. It will be scored for completion by the due date, but I'm not actually going to score any of the content at this time. So this is more or less a pass-fail kind of grade. Just an opportunity for you to begin engaging in some individual reflection and getting some of those thoughts down on paper.